Okay, guys, let's talk about this Electoral College. I will say right out, right now, the Electoral College is not needed in the year 2020. It's not necessary. It undermines democracy. And the only reason that we have it, besides political reasons and parties not wanting to lose power, is the fact that it's tradition and it is located in the Constitution. We don't like to change the Constitution of the United States. And we can't change the Constitution of the United States very easy. It's really difficult to do so. And so let's look at first why the Electoral College is in the Constitution of the United States, because I think that will give you an indication that it's not needed anymore. What is the result of having the Electoral College in the Constitution? What effect does it have on elections? What effect will it have on the 2020 election? So let's start with the reasoning behind the Electoral College. Electoral College is located in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, and it lays out a process by which the people, the country, so to speak, elects a president. The first reason why the Electoral College was placed in the Constitution is because the Founding Fathers in 1787 in Philadelphia did not want to replace a king with a king. That was a problem. If there was one issue that was overriding in the entire Constitutional Convention, it was this obsession and fear of another king. And it's funny because Thomas Jefferson was the ambassador to France at the time, and James Madison, who was more instrumental in writing the outline of the Constitution than any other individual, wrote back and forth to Jefferson, and Madison said to Jefferson, it's so bizarre here because we are talking about the fear of a king, the fear of a king, the fear of a chief executive that will rule like a king. And yet George Washington is sitting right here with us, and we know that Mr. Washington, General Washington, will be the first president of the United States. Madison said, and rightly so, their fear was who was to come after Washington. So they were obsessively afraid of replacing a king with a king, and so they built in all of these checks and balances overwhelmingly to keep that from happening. Number two, besides the mistrust of a king, they had an enormous mistrust of the people. So you got to remember that this little step towards democracy, all men are created equal, was not all men are created equal. The individuals that wrote the Constitution were wealthy, they were elite, they were well educated, and they were white. And so one of the greatest reasonings for having a new republic was to keep them wealthy and white. I mean, they feared losing their status at the hands of the common folk. And so consequently, they didn't trust the common folk. They didn't think that the common folk were informed enough to make a wise decision, possibly, that they did not have enough information. Well, maybe they were in rural areas where there wasn't as much information. They were, frankly, too ignorant to make the right decision. And so there must be catches, there must be insurance clauses to make sure that if these common folk, which didn't include women and didn't include blacks and didn't include people of any kind of property, if they had nothing, if they made the wrong call, then the wrong call could be fixed by the right call.
So while this is a democratic change from the previous style of government, I mean, all of Europe had kings and handed down ruling from God to king to man. And this was democracy. It wasn't the democracy that we think about today, and particularly when it came to electing a executive who could threaten your status and your money and your position. And so When they create the Electoral College, the idea is to have a group of elites, a group of intellectuals, people like themselves, probably themselves, at the different states to be the final check on the power of the people. So the people's vote comes in, and then this group that equals the number of electors in the state makes the final call the second week in December every year at their state capital, thus protecting their status. That's not the same today. That isn't what happens today at the state capitals the second week in December. Now, both sides pick their electors. The Democrats have 16 electors in Michigan, and the Republicans have 16 electors in Michigan. And whoever wins goes to Lansing the second week in December, parties, drinks champagne, toasts, and pulls the lever. And these are not elite intellectuals. These are people that donate lots of dollars to the campaign. So this is nothing like what was envisioned by the founders. And what was envisioned by the founders is nothing like we envision democracy. So this idea in itself is wholly undemocratic in regards to 21st century democracy.
Third was this continual constitutional convention aimed at bringing the South in on signing the Constitution. Southern states were not really up for signing the Constitution. They wanted to protect slavery. I think they feared that slavery would eventually be removed if they were in this larger republic, which eventually it was. And so the Three-Fifths Compromise, which called out that black people were black slaves were 3/5 of a person for House of Representative polling numbers, which raised the House of Representative numbers up for Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Look, South Carolina had more slaves than they had white people at the time. And they got 3/5 of a person for each one to calculate voting in the House of Representatives. Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, all of these states got representation based on white people and 3/5 of a black person. And so when you figure the electoral votes, which is 2 senators numbers plus your representative numbers, the South gains more clout in selecting a president, which is another constitutional choice with slavery, with pro-slavery forces. So those 3 issues are the main issues that this Electoral College is baked into the Constitution in the first place. Is it needed? No, not anymore. Each of those issues is negated by 233 years of life. Come on. What doesn't change in 233 years in the United States of America or anywhere in the West? Look at the evolution of ships. There were ships in 1787, right? Well, look at what ships look like today. Look at how ships are today, how they move, the time it takes to go across the Atlantic. I mean, cruise ships are the size of islands. You have nuclear-powered submarines compared to these clipper ships. Airplanes weren't even invented, and now we have jet planes. Cars. Come on, cars. 1907, is that when the Model T came about? And now we have all sorts of automobiles, and in the future we'll have flying cars. Phones. All carry a freaking cell phone. I mean, even if you look back to when I was a kid, Mr. Barry was a kid. Those phones had cords. They had dial numbers. Sometimes you had party lines with somebody else on the same line. Time marches on for everything but the Electoral College. 233 years, and it is the same. Even if you look at this thought that there was this distrust, this rabid distrust of the people, you have to look at in 1913, the 17th Amendment changes this distrust with the Senate. See, originally the House of Representatives was voted on by the people. It was the people's house. That's why Article 1 is the House of Representatives. It is ideally supposed to be the truest representation of the people in the federal government. Number one, that's where the power resides, is in the House of Representatives. Most important things begin in the House of Representatives. The Senate, made to balance the House, 2 senators per state, was originally, those senators were chosen by the states. So the states would elect their senators and send them to Washington. Usually they were just wealthy people that were well connected. And then in 1913, the voting of the senators changed to go directly to the people. So don't tell me that you can't change this situation and have the people vote directly. They can. That was a change in the Constitution regarding the Senate. The same thing can happen regarding the presidency of the United States. So that those two things those things are significant. All of those things are significant. So let's stop and let me show you something.
2016 final vote with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And so if we look at this as an example of an electoral college breakdown, we can see things. We can see that Michigan up here has, if you look, boom, 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 boom. Whoops, okay. Michigan right here has 16 electoral votes. That comes from Michigan having 2 senators and 14 representatives. It's one of the middle-sized population states in the country. The largest population state in the country is over here in California. California has 55 electoral votes, which is 53 representatives and 2 senators. Texas is the second largest with 36, 34 and 2. Florida, 27 and 2. Pennsylvania, 18 and 2. New York, 27 and 2. And so these numbers reflect the total electoral vote numbers inside of that state. So whoever gets the most votes in Michigan gets all 16 of Michigan's electoral votes. Whoever gets California's total popular vote gets 55 votes. Since there are 435 people in the House of Representatives, 100 people in the Senate, that's 535, and then the District of Columbia down here, D.C., gets 3 votes. Now, D.C. does not have a senator and does not have a representative. No 2 senators, no representative. That's another tradition of the Constitution that needs changing. Because in Washington, D.C., those individuals have no representation in Congress. That's absurd in 2020. They have more people than Wyoming out here. They have more people than Vermont and Delaware over here. And so, right up here, Vermont. And so there are things that need to change. So you have 538 total possible votes. 270 is the majority of 538. Donald Trump won this electoral vote pretty handily in 2016, even though he had 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton when you added up all the votes. So this is like the 4th time in American history in which a president has gotten fewer votes than his opponent and still won the election because of the Electoral College. That there is the biggest disservice, is it not?
that even though you win the most votes, you don't win the presidency. And think about how it suppresses people's vote. We're always talking about Americans don't vote, Americans don't vote. Well, if Donald Trump in the polls, and we have polls that show nowadays who's going to win, if he's going to win Texas and you're a Democrat, you're blue, you're a Democrat, and you got a busy day, you just don't go and vote. You just say, my vote doesn't matter. It isn't going to count. If we elected by popular vote, more people would vote. More people would come to the polls and vote. In California, what if you're a Republican? You're a Republican, and California always goes to the Democrats. What gets you out to vote when you know that your vote doesn't matter? It really doesn't matter. And so if we had a popular vote, more people would vote. Now, there are arguments that people in rural areas like Montana and North Dakota and South Dakota and Wyoming, they won't get the information that they need. That the founding fathers understood the fact that if you didn't have information, then you were at a disadvantage. That doesn't hold water anymore. We have cable TV. We have newspapers all over the country. We have the internet. We have cell phones. We have TikTok. You have to dig a hole and climb in and not want to know about it. And so it doesn't work to say, oh, that they are at a disadvantage. That doesn't hold water anymore. In fact, they are at a huge advantage, as I'll show you in this next slide. Okay, let me talk to you now about this disproportionate power in voting. See, try to figure this out, okay? Because you have different amounts. Remember, Michigan had 16 electoral votes. And look at this rank. It's 45th highest voting power, because what you do is you take the amount of people in Michigan and you divide it by its electoral votes. And so 471,223 people per electoral vote. The places that it would seem that the normal thought is that California has the most power because it has 55 votes, and Texas the second most because it has 38. But it is just the opposite. Nobody lives in Wyoming, people. I've been there. It's empty. It's beautiful in the west, but it's empty. North Dakota, nobody lives there because it's not beautiful in the north, the south, the east, or the west. But North Dakota has 3 electoral votes. Why does this happen? It happens because everybody gets the 2 senatorial votes. And the senatorial votes are not based on population. Those senatorial votes are based on 2 per state. Remember, that was made to balance out the government. And so if you've got 3 electoral votes in North Dakota, it's the 4th highest voting power in the country. The highest is Wyoming, because there's nobody there, but it still has 3 votes. So all of these places that have a low number of votes, South Dakota is 6th highest, Montana is 9th highest, Idaho is 14th highest. If you don't have anybody in your state, but you still have 3 electoral votes, you're getting a lot more per vote in the Electoral College. So a person voting, me, you voting in Michigan, you're the 41st out of 50 states in what you get for your vote in the Electoral College. This argument that California would rule the country. Well, California has the most people in the country, and its power in the presidential election is 49th highest. Florida is 50th. If people live in Florida, people in Florida's vote should count as much as people who live in Wyoming. This idea that we're going to manipulate the voting to save the republic from a king is 233 years old. This idea that we are going to save the republic from itself because somebody in North Dakota has no information about the presidency is a farce. That's not true. Anybody that wants information about this election can get information about this election. This idea that we still base this Electoral College on a document that rewarded slave states so that they would join the Union when 70 years later they tried to break the Union. This is just preposterous that we still do this. Look at Pennsylvania, 48th highest voting power in the entire election. Vermont will be high. Look at that, second highest, because nobody lives in Vermont. And so this whole idea, this manipulation is a manipulation that is out of date. It's as out of date as dial phones are out of date, as the Wright brothers plane is out of date, as the Model T Ford is out of date. Okay, let me talk to you a little bit about this map right here first, and then I'm going to go over the 2000 and the updated 2020 map. So this map right here, this is the first election, the first presidential election, 1789. George Washington won, surprise, surprise, and John Adams came in second, which made him the vice president. That's changed. That wouldn't work so good today. How would you like to see Donald Trump as president and Hillary Clinton as his vice president? Anyhow, in 1789, this was the electoral vote breakdown. So you see, looking up, God, New Hampshire had 5 votes back then and only has 4 now. Massachusetts, Connecticut had 7, Pennsylvania 10, New Jersey 6. The northern states had a lot more votes, a lot more power. They had more clout in the Constitution in selecting a president. And then Virginia was the biggest and the strongest state. But after Virginia, Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina, Delaware, and Maryland, those were all slave states. And they would not sign the Constitution without having more power. So Georgia's 5 votes is not really reflective of their population because they're counting slaves as 3/5 of a person in the 3 representative votes there. They had 2 senators. South Carolina, remember I told you, had more slaves than they did white people. Must have had a lot of slaves because they have 5 representatives and 2 senators. And so the power to choose George Washington, who was a Virginian, a Southerner, and a slave owner, lie disproportionately in the South. And so it's important to look at the first electoral vote. Now, as the country grows, the number of representatives gets apportioned to the separate states. We now sit at 435 representatives. That number doesn't grow now. What it does is it reapportions. So every 10 years, as they evaluate the numbers of people in states, they take that 435 and they maybe subtract a representative from one state and move it to a state where people are moving to. That's why southern states, deep south, in the southwest, Arizona has grown, Nevada has grown, Florida has grown because people are moving to warm climate. Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin have lost numbers. Okay, let's talk about the differences between where blue is and where red is on this map. If you look, and this is pretty traditional. This is the 2016 election with Trump, but it goes this way often. Up here on the West Coast, we have a lot of blue. Over here on the East Coast, we have a lot of blue. Illinois is almost always blue. Red is concentrated down in the South and up through the Upper West. Why is this? A couple of reasons. One is the philosophy of the 2 parties. The Democratic Party is much more liberal than the Republican Party. The Republican Party is based on conservative values. Conservative values will include religion. It will include a right to life in the abortion issue. That is a big Republican issue. It includes businesses, and to leave businesses alone, to let businesses move as they will without taxing, without regulation. And usually the Republican Party is supportive of U.S. military. And so those are basic Republican issues. Those tend to be big issues down in the southern United States and up in the West. The West is a different kind of conservative, however. I don't see it as a religious conservative, more of a just stay the hell out of my life conservative. Democrats, however, on the other hand, a liberal agenda is more to get involved and to rebalance the tax system so that programs are created to help people who are less financially well off. It also is the issue of the environment in global climate change are big issues for the Democratic Party and liberals in general. Also, a woman's right to choose is a liberal issue. Universal health care for all is a liberal issue, as is access to college. So those are kind of like what sets the parties apart in regards to their philosophies. And so then you match the philosophies with the part of the country. This part of the country over here on the West Coast is far more liberal. I lived out there. Come on, the environment up in Washington is huge. In California, it's huge. In Oregon, it's huge. People are environmentally conscious and vote that way. Same with the East Coast. Far more liberal in regards to issues than in the Deep South. The Deep South is more conservative based, and since the Civil Rights Movement has been almost wholly Republican. That's one reason that we have the situation that we do in regards to the breakdown of blue and red. Okay, a second reason why the breakdown sets where it does in blue and red is urban versus rural population. Urban is city, rural is countryside. So take a look at this map. This map balances all of the red equals the same population as all of the gray. So that seems kind of strange, doesn't it? But these are cities, and cities are densely packed with people. Now, if you remember the blue and the red breakdown, let's go blue first. California has a lot of people. These are high population, high density areas here. Seattle is up here and Portland is here. And so urban areas that dominate rural, otherwise rural states are going to be blue because of all of the people in those areas. I told you about Illinois going blue almost always. Why? Well, Chicago. Chicago is the third biggest or fifth biggest city in the country, and its population dominates the state of Illinois. You have Detroit's influence in Michigan, and as Detroit goes, Michigan goes. Over here, Pennsylvania is usually dominated by the East Coast, although Trump took Pennsylvania last time, and there's a lot of population centers out here in the West. Urban areas tend to be more liberal. Urban areas tend to be more ethnic. They tend to be younger. They tend to have more business and highly educated people in them who tend to be liberal. And so that would be one reason why liberal groups are in those areas and turn those states blue. Colorado has been going blue recently because of the Denver area. Now, rural areas, and one issue that I didn't bring up in the Republicans is guns. Gun rights are really big for Republican voters. Well, a lot of Republican voters and gun right advocates are from rural areas. The South is rural. It's got population centers, but they aren't as overwhelming as in California or up in Seattle or down in Tucson and Phoenix. And out here, look, you see the large squares? Those are counties. That means there's nobody out there. There's nobody in Wyoming. There's no urban areas, that's for sure. And so it's one giant empty rural landscape. A couple of the states that are enigmas are both Texas and Florida, both high urban areas and high rural areas. Texas has been reliably Republican and red for a long time. But these urban areas, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, these areas are getting larger. As they get larger, Texas will become more blue. Florida has big urban areas and big rural areas, and Florida is the ultimate swing state. And so the traditional breakdown of red and blue is colored by both the liberal and conservative policies of the areas of the country and the urban and rural makeups of the cities and countrysides within those parts of the country. Hopefully that will help you understand where the basics of these two party strongholds are, and then it opens up the swing states, which will go sometimes red and sometimes blue, and in this election particularly are up in the air. Okay, then let's take a look at one final item, and that is NPR's update of October 10th, 2020. It will give you a final look at where this election is playing out in regards to the Electoral College, and it will center on swing states, of which Michigan is one. Hey guys, final piece to the puzzle. Here you go. As of October 9th, 2020, this is the electoral map as seen by National Public Radio. It's a pretty good source. You'll see right off that the numbers are different than my Real Clear Politics map is in the back of the room, because what it's done is it's taken some of these toss-up states and it's said that they're leaning one way or another. So there's a little bit difference. We'll talk about that. And then I'm going to play for you the 3-minute summary off of NPR that should tie this whole electoral thing up. The number one thing to remember is that the person with the most votes is irrelevant for choosing a president of the United States. It's not one vote, it's 50 separate votes. So let's look at where things are. In the map, the Real Clear Politics map in the room, these states are all toss-up. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa. Those 5. Now, National Public Radio is saying, well, some of these other guys, they've leaned towards a candidate. And so Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they say have all leaned towards Biden. And they say that Arizona and Nevada have also leaned towards Biden, while Texas has leaned towards Trump. That might be true. Most of the polls I see are on the edge of moving in that direction, with the 5 states still fully toss-up. I think that shows a trend that nationally Biden is improving. He's doing better. Trump's campaign is in disarray. He's got coronavirus, and his one debate performance was pretty iffy. I think that bodes well for Biden in regards to the popular vote and maybe inside the swing states. But this Electoral College makes it all so sketchy. I think, and I know I've said this in class, that these 3 states are so key: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those 3 states went to Trump in 2016. Those 3 states, according to NPR, 3 weeks before the election, are leaning towards Biden. That's significant. That is significant. Those states are normally blue states, Democrat states, and Trump didn't pound, he won on all 3 of those states against Hillary Clinton. And they look like they're rebounding back into the camp of the Democrats. You go out here, this is a big surprise, Arizona. Arizona is becoming more and more liberal, more blue, because Californians are moving in. It's too expensive to live in California. People from the north with education and a professional degree are moving in to Arizona. They tend to vote Democrat. Younger people tend to vote Democrat. The suburbs, women are voting. The suburbs outside of Phoenix and Tucson are huge, and there's a lot of women voting for Biden inside those areas. So Arizona, it is understandable, but a little bit of a change to be looking at moving towards the Democrats. Nevada, not so much. Nevada probably will go. Texas, as expected, will become red. Not bright red, but red. And then you have the 4 toss-up states that continue to move throughout this election. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the presidential candidates will go to those states? I don't know. It's not like it was in the old days. You didn't have to show up. You have TV, you have internet, you have online, you have Zoom, you don't have to be there. That's why the argument to keep in the Electoral College doesn't hold water. However, being in person, especially for Trump, seems to be important for him and for his followers. I expect him to spend a lot of time in Florida and Ohio and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a real key state, and I think that you'll see a lot of Trump in Pennsylvania. I don't know about Joe Biden. I don't know about Kamala Harris. But that is where we stand currently, somewhere in between this map and the map at the back of the room. And I will leave you with the NPR piece on the update to the election.
Between the criticism of his debate performance, coronavirus hospitalization, and infection cluster at the White House, a slew of new polls have shown President Trump falling further behind Democrat Joe Biden. What does that mean in the handful of swing states that are likely to decide the election less than a month from now? NPR has a new analysis of the electoral map. To walk us through it is our senior political editor and correspondent, Domenico Montanaro. Welcome back.
Hey there, Audie.
Nationally, we've seen Biden has had a pretty steady lead all year long. As things get tighter, what is your analysis finding?
Well, after that debate performance in particular, we've seen Joe Biden's lead widen in a lot of national polls. And when you drill down into the states, Biden is widening his lead overall in the key Electoral College states. We now have Biden with states likely to go his way or leaning in his direction with 290 electoral votes to Trump's 163. And as you know, a candidate needs 270 to win the presidency because that's a majority of the 538 available.
Where is the Democratic ticket making the most significant gains?
Well, given everything that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, everything we moved in this map since last month is in Biden's direction. Most notably, the 2 states that really stand out are Wisconsin and Arizona. We had them as toss-ups last month, and now they look like they're leaning toward Biden. We'd been reluctant, frankly, to move Wisconsin out of the toss-up column because it has a very high percentage of its population with white voters who don't have a college degree. They're a group that leans very heavily toward President Trump, but the polls have shown a very consistent lead for Biden, and with him now over 50%. And that means at this point, Trump would have to win over voters who are saying they've settled on Biden rather than simply being undecided.
We've heard a lot about Arizona, which has been reliably Republican for so many years. When you actually analyze the state, where is the support coming from?
Well, right now, it is leaning in his direction. It's right on the edge of being a toss-up, but a couple of reasons for why we moved it here. Biden has had a fairly small but consistent lead overall. Trump hasn't led in the average of the polls there since March, toward the beginning of the pandemic. And when you look inside the polls, the place where most of the vote comes from in Arizona is Maricopa County. About 2/3 of the vote comes from there. That's where Phoenix is. And Biden is beating Trump there pretty consistently, doing better than Hillary Clinton did, and that's all about the suburbs. Biden is beating Trump in poll after poll with suburban voters, especially suburban women, by huge margins.
And to that point, when I look at the map here on npr.org, I see that you've moved some states that were solidly red. Now they're shaded pink, still leaning in the president's direction. What's going on?
Right. This is one of the more interesting things overall because Biden is unlikely to win some of these states, places like Missouri and Alaska. We moved from likely Republican to lean Republican. And, like I said, Biden's not likely to win those places. But the fact that the sea level seems to have risen is significant. Missouri, you might remember, used to be a swing state. John McCain beat Obama there in 2008 by just 3,700 votes. In Alaska, what's remarkable, Biden is polling closer there than Trump is in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada. And it's something we're seeing across a lot of red states, with Biden doing better than Clinton did in 2016. And that's all because of white voters. He's overperforming with white voters across the country. And if that trend holds, it could have enormous consequences, and means at this point Biden is on track to win more votes than Clinton overall and win the popular vote by a wider margin. Of course, the election, we have to say, is determined by those key states in the Electoral College. Trump certainly remains in striking distance in those.
That's NPR's Domenico Montanaro. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
This is NPR News.